Young billionaire shelters a poor little girl on a freezing night, but when he wakes up, she's gone and leaves a note. It was the first night I didn't feel cold. Mom was wrong about you, Dad. He is shocked and begins to cry. The sound of Ethan Walker's footsteps echoed through the marble lobby of Walker and Associates. 28 floors above the city's chaos, his office remained lit long after the other lights were turned off. He was always the last one to leave. He was always alone. 28 years old, 28 floors. The number followed him like a shadow. Rumors about his fortune grew as fast as his reputation in court, relentless, calculating, infallible. Ethan did not smile when he won multi-million-dollar cases. He merely nodded, as if confirming the obvious. That night, the watch on his wrist read 9 p.m. as the elevator reached the ground floor. The night security was already familiar with his meticulous routine. "Good evening, Mr. Walker," said the security guard, a middle-aged man whose name Ethan had never bothered to learn. "Evening," he replied without looking up from his phone, where he was reviewing the details of the case he would argue the following morning. The biting December wind slapped him in the face as soon as the automatic doors slid open. Ethan adjusted his cashmere scarf and pulled his overcoat tighter around his body. The forecast said it would be the coldest night of the year. Not that it mattered. His driver would be waiting, his penthouse would be warm, and tomorrow would be just another day of carefully orchestrated victories. Snowflakes fell in an almost hypnotic rhythm, forming a thin white layer over the black asphalt. The streets, usually buzzing with activity, were deserted. Only the muffled noise of the occasional taxi and the howling wind broke the silence. The city seemed to be asleep, but Ethan was still awake, always awake. Checking his watch again, he felt annoyed. His driver was late for the first time in 3 years. Ethan hated anything unplanned. His life operated like a Swiss watch, precise, controlled, with no margin for error. He decided to call the service, but found his phone battery completely dead. Another failure. A surge of irritation ran down his spine. Left with no choice, he started walking toward his apartment, about 15 blocks away. The cold grew harsher with each step, but anger kept him warm. He thought about how he would fire the driver in the morning, how he would reorganize his schedule, how he would never again allow such an inconvenience. Lost in his calculating reflections, Ethan continued along the deserted streets, his pace quickening against the biting wind. He was still at least 30 blocks from his apartment when, while passing a darker alley, he almost failed to notice a small figure curled against a building wall. It was a subtle movement, a tremor perhaps, that drew his attention to a slight, fragile body dressed in clothing far too thin for such a freezing night. Ethan hesitated. Normally, he would have ignored the situation. Homeless individuals were common in the city, especially on nights as cold as this. It was not his problem. It never had been. He just had to keep walking. But something made him stop. A small cough came from that tiny figure, a child's cough. Ethan froze. Reluctantly, he drew closer and bent down a bit. "Hey," he said, his voice harsher than he intended. The figure lifted her head, revealing the face of a little girl. No more than 6 or 7 years old, she looked up at him with large brown eyes. Her nose was red from the cold, her lips slightly blue, and tiny snowflakes clung to her dark, tangled hair. She wore only a thin t-shirt, threadbare jeans, and torn sneakers. Her whole body trembled uncontrollably. "Are you okay? It's freezing out here," Ethan asked, glancing around hoping to see someone else nearby. Instinctively, he took off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. The girl stared at him for a few seconds before replying, her voice stuttering from the cold. I don't know where to go." Ethan frowned, feeling uncomfortably self-conscious under the child's gaze. It was as if she could see right through the invisible armor he had constructed over the years. Her response caught him off guard. He looked around again, but the street stayed empty, and the snow was falling more heavily now. "What's your name?" he asked, more out of the need for information than genuine curiosity. "Emily," she replied, her teeth chattering. I can't feel my fingers anymore." Those simple words carried undeniable urgency. "Indeed," It was dangerously cold. The kind of cold that could kill a small child left out in the open for too long. Far too cold even for Ethan Walker, with all his money and expensive coats. And for a fleeting instant, he felt something he had not felt in years. Real worry, real fear. The situation demanded immediate action. Ethan looked around. He was too far from home to carry the girl there by foot, and there were no taxis in sight on that deserted street. He pulled out his phone again, but the battery was still dead. "I'll take you to my place," he said, the words surprising even him. "We have to find a taxi first." The words left his mouth before he could think. It was a matter of survival now. Emily looked up at him, startled, as if she hadn't expected kindness from a stranger. Or maybe, Ethan thought, she simply did not expect kindness from anyone anymore. She tried to stand, but her legs seemed too weak. Without hesitation, Ethan scooped her into his arms, surprising even himself with the gesture. She weighed so little it frightened him, and her body still felt ice cold through his layers of clothing. "Come on, we need to warm you up," he said, holding her closer while scanning the street for a taxi. Emily huddled against his chest, her body still shaking uncontrollably, but her gaze fixed on his face with a combination of surprise and trust that unsettled him. She clung to a small, faded purple backpack, obviously her only possession. By some extraordinary stroke of luck, Ethan saw a taxi turning the corner. He waved urgently with his free arm. The cab pulled over, the driver eyeing with suspicion this well-dressed man carrying a ragged child. "Walker Towers penthouse," Ethan said, getting in with Emily still in his arms. "It's an emergency." The night doorman, a man named Marcus, who always greeted Ethan with a smile that never got a response, widened his eyes at the unusual sight when the taxi stopped in front of the building. The ever-distant Mr. Walker carrying a half-frozen child in his arms. "Mr. Walker, what happened? Do you need help? Should I call an ambulance?" "No, Marcus. Turn the heat in my penthouse to full blast, right now." Ethan spoke with a sense of urgency that surprised even himself. The doorman immediately complied, picking up the phone without more questions, a perk of owning the entire building. In the elevator, Emily remained curled in Ethan's arms, shivering less and less thanks to his body heat. Her half-open eyes wandered around the luxurious space, equal parts amazed and puzzled. "Do you live here by yourself?" she asked when the elevator reached the top floor. "Yes." "It's really big for just one person." Ethan said nothing. He had never thought his apartment was too big. It was simply inappropriate, functional, like everything in his life. As soon as they entered, the lights came on automatically, revealing a minimalist and impeccably organized space. Designer furniture, abstract art, a panoramic view of the city, everything selected with precision, nothing left to chance, nothing suggesting warmth or humanity. Emily paused in the entryway, as though afraid she might dirty the immaculate floor with her muddy shoes. "You can take off your shoes," Ethan said, pulling off his own coat. "And the coat too, if you want." She complied, showing socks with holes in the toes and a t-shirt far too thin for winter. Her small body trembled visibly. "Are you hungry?" Ethan asked, realizing that it had been years since he'd asked anyone that question. Meals, for him, were just another part of his routine, not something he shared. Emily nodded timidly. "A little?" He led her into the ultra-modern kitchen, where he practically never cooked. He opened the fridge, finding only the most basic ingredients. His private chef kept them in stock even though he rarely ate at home. "What do you like to eat?" Emily just shrugged again. "Anything." Something was off about a child not having any preference for food, Ethan thought. Kids were supposed to be picky, whimsical. They were supposed to want pizza and candy, not anything. With limited culinary skills, Ethan prepared a ham and cheese sandwich and heated a can of soup. As he worked, he cast glances at Emily out of the corner of his eye. She remained quietly perched on a tall stool, her feet swinging freely, watching his every move with a near-scientific fascination. "Why do you have so many controls?" The question startled him. "Controls? Over there," she pointed to a wall panel. "There's a lot of buttons." "Oh." Ethan realized she was referring to the home automation system, there for lights, temperature, music. "Like magic," Emily concluded, her eyes lighting up for the first time. It wasn't magic, but top-tier technology. It was convenience and efficiency. Still, Ethan didn't correct her. There was something endearing in her interpretation. When the food was ready, Emily ate with a silent gratitude that disconcerted him. She relished each bite as if it were the most delicious thing she'd ever tasted. Though Ethan knew it was nothing special, just basic food, not remotely comparable to the award-winning restaurants he frequented for business. "Is it good?" he asked, oddly eager for her approval. She nodded earnestly. "Really good." "Thank you." The smile she offered him was genuine, free of ulterior motives or expectations, a child's smile. Ethan could not remember the last time anyone had smiled at him like that. His clients smiled out of convenience, his employees out of fear, his flings out of self-interest. But this smile was different. It was real. After dinner, he brought her to the living room, where the Italian designer sofa seemed out of place beneath Emily's tiny, fragile presence. She glanced at the giant flat-screen TV that nearly covered an entire wall. "Can we watch something?" she asked, her voice tentative, as if testing how far she could go. Ethan realized he had not turned that TV on in weeks, maybe months. He had neither the time nor the inclination. "Sure," he said, picking up the remote. "What do you want to watch?" Emily seemed surprised by the question, as though she had not expected to be given a choice. "Cartoons?" Feeling somewhat lost, Ethan flipped through channels looking for something suitable for children. He found a cartoon about talking animals and stopped there, watching Emily settle onto the couch, eyes glued to the colorful screen. As she watched, Ethan tried to process the bizarreness of the situation. In under an hour, his carefully structured routine had been completely derailed. His spotless apartment suddenly had small handprints on mirrors, crumbs on the kitchen island, and the sound of a child's laughter echoing in rooms that were normally silent. He ought to feel annoyed, uncomfortable. Strangely, he did not. In fact, watching Emily laugh over something as trivial as a talking cartoon cat was somewhat hypnotic. Without even noticing, Ethan relaxed into the sofa, his usually rigid posture easing. The exhaustion of the day set in, and he allowed himself to close his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, he saw that Emily had fallen asleep next to him. Her head had fallen to one side, dark hair partially covering a peaceful face. She was clutching her tattered purple backpack to her chest, as if it were a box of treasures. Ethan stood up carefully so as not to wake her and grabbed a blanket from a nearby closet. Placing it gently over the small figure, he felt a strange, unfamiliar tightening in his chest, the stirrings of protectiveness he had never recognized in himself. He sat down in a nearby armchair and continued to watch her. Who was this child? Where had she come from? Why was she alone? The questions bounced around in his mind, but for the moment, they remained unanswered. He did know one thing. Something had changed. Not just his evening or his routine, but something within him. A novel warmth, a feeling he could not name, began to melt the layers of ice he had gathered over the years. For the first time in ages, Ethan Walker felt something. Not the calibrated emotions he permitted himself in court, not the cool rush of victory in his career, not the fleeting thrill of expensive acquisitions. It was different, something genuine. And while the snow continued to fall outside, turning the city into a quiet, white world, Ethan realized that maybe, just maybe, his own inner winter was beginning to thaw. The sun was already shining when Ethan opened his eyes. Disoriented, he looked around and noticed that he'd fallen asleep in an armchair in the living room. A strange feeling took hold of him. Silence. Something about it felt different that morning. Normally, silence was his constant companion, but now it felt wrong. Then he remembered Emily. He jolted up, his body protesting the uncomfortable position. The couch where the girl had slept was empty. The blanket was perfectly folded, as though by a housekeeper, but there was no trace of the tiny visitor. "Emily?" he called, his voice echoing in the empty apartment. No answer. Ethan went through every room, flinging doors open and calling her name. His growing anxiety was new and unsettling. The bathrooms, guest rooms, the kitchen, everywhere was empty. It was as if the girl had simply vanished. Coming back to the living room, confused and worried, he saw something on the folded blanket. A small piece of paper, folded in half. A note. He picked it up with trembling fingers. It was from a notepad he kept in the kitchen. The handwriting was childish, large, uneven letters, some inverted. The innocence of that writing clashed with the meaning of the words. It was the first night I didn't feel cold. Mom was wrong about you. Dad. Dad. That single word struck Ethan like a punch in the gut. He read the note again and again. It was as though rereading might help turn those words into something comprehensible. Dad. He dropped onto the couch, the paper crumpling in his grip. Impossible. He wasn't a father. He'd never had children. He had never wanted children. Fatherhood was as foreign to him as living on Mars. Standing abruptly, Ethan walked to the bar in his living room. It was too early for a drink, but desperate times called for desperate measures. He poured whiskey and downed it all in a single burning gulp. The familiar warmth grounded him back to reality. He looked again at the note. Surely this was some mistake. Emily must have confused him with someone else. Maybe the cold had disoriented her, or perhaps she had mental health issues. Maybe she was just a confused child. But another section of his mind formed a different, terrifying theory. What if, in some unimaginable twist, she really was his daughter? The idea felt absurd enough to leave him weak at the knees. Ethan Walker, who had built his entire life on control and predictability, now faced a chasm of uncertainty. He needed to transform it into something he could interpret and, therefore, control. He marched to his home office, powered on his laptop, and opened a new spreadsheet. Methodically, he began listing every significant relationship he'd had in the last decade. The screen filled with dates, names, lengths of time. Viewed analytically, his romantic history appeared surprisingly short. A handful of relationships, all brief, all ending without drama, at least on his side. Emily looked to be 6 or 7 years old. That meant he would have to reach back even further, to his college years. And therein lay the problem. That time was a blur in his memory, sacrificed for the sake of ambition. The harder he tried to recall faces, names, events from back then, the more they slipped away like water through cupped hands. The tighter he squeezed, the less remained. He remembered his professors, his books, his grades, always perfect. But the parties, the casual dates, the people. It was like he'd built a wall between himself and a past he deemed irrelevant for success. He tilted his head back and groaned in frustration. How would he figure out if Emily was his daughter when he couldn't even remember those he might have impregnated? The phone rang, snapping him from his thoughts. It was his secretary. "Mr. Walker, Dr. Heigman has called 3 times this morning. The hearing starts in 2 hours, and he's worried about reviewing the strategy." Ethan glanced at the clock, 8:45 a.m. He'd completely forgotten about that crucial court date. "Tell him I'll be there in an hour," he replied automatically, then hung up. His body switched to its well-practiced routine: shower, shave, perfect suit. But his mind was elsewhere, thinking of the brown eyes of a girl who called him Dad, thinking about a past he couldn't access. As he adjusted his tie in the mirror, Ethan made a decision. After the hearing, he would hire a private investigator, someone discreet and efficient. He had to find Emily again. He needed answers. Riding down the elevator to the lobby, he barely took note of his driver's text saying he was waiting. For the first time in years, Ethan's thoughts were not consumed by a case, legal tactics, or professional objectives. "Good morning, Mr. Walker," greeted Marcus, the doorman, as the elevator doors slid open. Ethan stopped suddenly. Marcus. He had seen Emily the night before. "Marcus, the little girl who was with me yesterday. Did you see her leave the building this morning?" The doorman appeared surprised. This was likely the longest conversation Ethan had ever initiated with him. "No, sir. My shift started at 6, and I didn't see any child. George was on night duty. Maybe he saw something." Ethan nodded, concealing his frustration. "When George comes in, have him call me, please." "Yes, sir. Did something happen to your niece?" Ethan hesitated momentarily. "No, everything's fine. I just need to know when she left." As he got in the car, he gave instructions to the driver. then leaned back, trying to gather himself. The world outside continued as normal, people in a hurry on the sidewalk, impatient drivers honking, skyscrapers scraping the sky. Yet for Ethan, something essential had shifted. It felt like a crack had opened under his feet. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to retrieve memories. Jumbled images of his college years returned. The library where he spent endless hours, the cramped apartment he kept obsessively clean, the route to class he'd memorized. Then, like a flash of light, a face surfaced, a smile, dark hair. It was fuzzy, elusive, but there, Sarah. The name whispered through his thoughts. Sarah, something. She'd been his girlfriend sophomore year, an artist, an idealist. In every sense, his opposite. Ethan felt his chest constrict. They had broken up abruptly. He'd chosen a prestigious summer internship in another state, and the relationship had simply ended. Like other things in his life that didn't directly serve his goals, he attempted to recall more. Her appearance, the sound of her voice, how long they'd dated, yet it was like trying to peer through frosted glass. He saw vague outlines, but nothing sharp. Could she be Emily's mother? The girl also had dark hair. And those eyes, there was a hint of familiarity he couldn't quite pin down. The car stopped in front of the stately building housing his law firm. Ethan smoothed his jacket, put on the professional demeanor everyone expected, and entered with absolute assurance. He briefly nodded to colleagues, exchanged a few pleasantries with the receptionist, and headed up by elevator to his private office. Once he shut his office door, his composure shattered. He slumped into his chair, allowing a rare moment of inner chaos. The possibility that he might have a daughter and had lost years of her life was utterly devastating. Why? Why had Emily shown up now? Why hadn't her mother, Sarah, ever reached out? And most significantly, why did the girl vanish after a single night? His intercom buzzed, letting him know Dr. Heigman had arrived for the pre-trial meeting. Ethan inhaled deeply, centered himself, and pressed the button to let him in. The case. He had to concentrate on the case. The next few hours tested his ability to compartmentalize. On the outside, he was the same brilliant lawyer everyone knew. Within he was fighting to rein in thoughts that kept drifting to a child's handwritten note. The hearing itself played out almost automatically. The words flowed. His objections were precise, his strategy flawless. He won, as usual. The client and partners congratulated him, as usual. He responded with polite smiles, as usual, but nothing about it felt usual. Back in his office, after dismissing his legal team, Ethan was alone once again. He stared at the phone. He should call the investigator. But first, he tried again to recall that hazy period in his past. Sarah. What was her last name? Miller. Johnson, was she tall or short? Where was she from? How long had they gone out? The questions multiplied. He faintly remembered arguments about the future. She spoke of social change and community-based art, ideas he dismissed as naive. He spoke of stability, career goals, things she found suffocating. A specific recollection broke through. Sarah displaying her illustrations, her eyes shining with pride, her passion evident as she explained her process. And he, an arrogant young man, made some remark about how impractical an art career was. He could still picture her face at that moment, hurt, disappointed. Ethan rubbed his eyes. Is that what she might have told Emily? That he was cold, practical, with no room for dreams or for children. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts again. It was Marcus, the doorman. Mr. Walker, I spoke with George, the overnight doorman. He says he didn't see any child leave, sir. In fact, he's certain nobody left your floor at all overnight. Ethan felt a shiver. You're sure? Absolutely, sir. We monitor all entrances, and the security cameras confirm it. If the girl left, it wasn't through a normal exit. Thanks, Marcus. Ethan hung up, perplexed. How had Emily gotten out? The penthouse was on the 28th floor, the windows sealed. There was no fire escape accessible from inside the apartment. She had apparently disappeared into thin air. A sense of unreality swept over him. What if this was all in his head? What if he had imagined the child, the note? He opened a desk drawer and took out the crumpled piece of paper he'd stuck in his pocket that morning. No, the note was real. The childish handwriting, the unsettling words, it was all real. Emily existed, and if she really were his daughter, where was she? Why had she shown up, only to vanish? Could it have been some sort of test? A message? For the first time in his adult life, Ethan Walker was completely lost. All of his certainties, all of his carefully cultivated control seemed suddenly fragile. Doubt settled in his chest like an unwelcome guest who refused to leave. It was more than just potential fatherhood. It was everything he believed he was and the choices he had made. It was as if he were being forced to look into a mirror that showed not only his reflection, but the shadows of all the roads not taken. And now, one of those roads had grown legs and come to find him. Ethan picked up the phone and dialed the number of the best private investigator he knew. He needed answers. He needed to find Emily again, and, perhaps for the first time in a very long time, he needed to find himself. The taxi stopped exactly where Ethan had found Emily 3 nights ago. He got out and stood for a moment, gazing at the ordinary sidewalk that now carried such weighty meaning. The cold still stung, though not as fiercely as it had that night. The snow had been partially shoveled away, leaving grimy heaps on the curbs. "Should I wait, sir?" asked the cab driver. "No, thank you." It was his 3rd time returning to that spot in a week. His first visit had been brief, almost furtive, as though he were ashamed of looking for a child who had appeared out of nowhere and vanished the same way. On the second visit, he'd mustered the courage to enter nearby shops and ask around. Today, he intended to thoroughly canvass every inch of the neighborhood. The preliminary report from the private investigator had arrived that morning. Nothing. No Emily matching that description in local school systems, no recent police reports involving a missing child, no leads on who she might be or where she could have come from. Ethan adjusted his scarf and began walking. This time he had a photo. Nothing professional, just a still shot taken from the security camera in his building's elevator, showing Emily in his arms. The image was grainy and in black and white, but it was better than nothing. His first stop was a corner bakery. The same elderly man who had served him the day before still wore a curious expression. "Find your girl?" the man asked. Ethan shook his head. "Not yet. I have a photo now." He showed the image, and the man adjusted his glasses, leaning in for a better look. The quality's pretty bad. But I still think I saw a girl like her with a woman a few days before you showed up." "Can you describe the woman?" The man shrugged. "Thin, dark hair. Didn't pay much attention. They passed through quickly, didn't buy anything. Again, no real help." Ethan thanked him and moved on. At the convenience store on the opposite corner, the clerk barely glanced at the photo before shaking her head. At the tiny cafe 2 blocks away, the same. At the newsstand, the pharmacy, the gas station, no one remembered seeing Emily. After 2 hours combing the neighborhood, Ethan decided to expand the search radius. Checking an app on his phone, he saw 3 homeless shelters in the area. The first was in a church basement. On entering, Ethan felt the stark contrast between the freezing street and the stuffy heat of the cramped and crowded space. Dozens of people lay on mattresses spread across the floor, sipping soup from plastic bowls. The smell of damp, food, and unwashed bodies hung in the air. A middle-aged woman wearing a faded apron and exhausted eyes greeted him at the entrance. "May I help you?" she asked, eyeing his expensive suit with suspicion. "I'm looking for a little girl," he replied, doing his best to keep his voice neutral. "Her name is Emily. She's around 7. The woman narrowed her eyes. "You from social services?" "No, I'm a family friend. We're worried about her." The lie emerged more easily than he expected. She still seemed wary, but nodded all the same. "We have a few kids here, but no new Emily in the last few days." Ethan took out the photo. She examined it carefully. "No, I haven't seen her. But if you're hunting for kids, you should check the Hope Center. They specialize in families and children at risk." Ethan jotted down the address she provided. As he turned to leave, the woman stopped him with a question. "Are you sure this girl is actually missing?" "Sometimes. Well, Sometimes there are reasons children stay away from certain people. The implication that he might be a danger to Emily felt like a slap. He wanted to protest, to say he was possibly her father, but the words stuck in his throat. After all, what did he know about fatherhood? "I'm sure," he replied curtly, and left. The next two shelters were equally fruitless. At one, a young volunteer glanced at the photo and frowned. "Maybe, I'm not certain, but I think I saw a girl like that last week. She was with a woman. They looked like mother and daughter." Ethan's pulse quickened. "What did the woman look like?" "I don't recall precisely. I think she had dark hair. She was very thin. They seemed to be passing through and didn't stay. It was something, but not much." For the second time, someone mentioned a dark-haired woman. Could this be Sarah? Would he even recognize her after so many years? The Hope Center was in an older building, but well-maintained. As soon as Ethan entered, he noticed the difference. The place was clean and organized, with separate areas for various activities. Children played in one corner under adult supervision. In another area, women attended what looked like a workshop. A friendly receptionist greeted him. "May I help you?" Ethan explained his situation, opting this time for a version closer to the truth. "I'm looking for a girl named Emily, maybe 6 or 7 years old, dark hair. I have reason to believe she might be my daughter." The word still felt foreign on his tongue. The woman gave him a curious look. "And you're not sure?" Ethan took a deep breath. "It's complicated. I only recently found out she might exist." The receptionist studied him for a moment, then asked to see the photo. She scrutinized it closely before shaking her head. "I don't recall seeing this child, but would you like to talk to our social worker? She knows most of the families that come through here." Ethan nodded, and she led him to a small back office. The social worker, a middle-aged black woman with a confident bearing and piercing gaze, introduced herself as Dr. Reynolds. "Tell me your story, Mr. Walker. The complete version." Something in her tone allowed no evasion. Used to controlling conversations, Ethan felt oddly vulnerable. Nevertheless, he told her everything. Meeting Emily on that freezing night, her spending the night at his apartment, her mysterious disappearance, and the note calling him Dad. Dr. Reynolds listened in silence, occasionally jotting down notes. When he finished, she adjusted her glasses and looked him straight in the eye. "Mr. Walker, I've worked with vulnerable children for 20 years. I can tell when someone is lying, and I don't think you are. However, the situation you describe is unusual. Believe me, I'm aware. We don't have any Emily registered in our programs matching this description, but that doesn't say much. Many homeless children aren't officially registered anywhere. They're born invisible and stay that way. The idea of Emily living like that, invisible to the system, lacking school, medical care, safety, weighed heavily on Ethan. What can I do? Dr. Reynolds considered the question thoughtfully. I'll distribute the description through our support network. I also suggest you keep visiting shelters, especially during mealtime hours, when they tend to be busier. Perhaps you should also expand your search to other parts of the city. She hesitated briefly before continuing. Mr. Walker, I must ask, what do you plan to do if you find Emily? The question caught him off guard. He'd been so focused on finding her that he hadn't really considered what came next. You don't want to get to know her, figure out who she is. If she really is my daughter, I want to take responsibility. And if her mother wants nothing to do with you? Ethan had no answer for that. The thought of finding Emily only to lose her again was unbearable. I'll deal with that when it happens, he finally said. In the following weeks, the search consumed Ethan. His law firm began to notice his frequent absences, rescheduled meetings, and delegation of cases. For the first time in his career, work was no longer his top priority. Each morning began with visits to new shelters. Each afternoon, he roamed parks, plazas, and other places children might gather. He started recognizing other faces, not just Emily's, whom he obsessively sought, but the faces of a city he had never truly seen before. The woman who slept on the same bench for 15 years and knew every child by name. The ex-veteran who ran his own patrol at night to make sure no child slept alone. the retired teacher who gave free lessons under a makeshift tent under the bridge to anyone willing to learn. One afternoon, after another fruitless search, Ethan found himself at the back of an alleyway watching a group of children sharing a single sandwich. None of them were Emily, but all had that same expression, a mix of innocence and toughness that no child should have. On impulse, he went to a nearby diner and bought a dozen sandwiches, sodas and fries. Returning to the alley, he placed the food on the ground and stepped back. "It's okay," he said, taking a step away. "You can have it." One girl, not much older than Emily, was the first to approach. She picked up a sandwich, took a cautious bite, and then smiled. The others followed suit. As they ate, Ethan felt something shift in his chest. It wasn't pity, guilt, or any simple emotion he could name. It was a connection, an understanding that these young human beings shared the same world as him. "Do you know a girl named Emily?" he asked, showing the worn photo once more. The older girl shrugged. "There's a lot of Emilys around. This one has dark hair, brown eyes, about 7 years old." The girl took another bite of her sandwich, chewing slowly as she thought. "I think I saw someone like that with an older lady last week, near the community center, you know, by that big church." Ethan's heart pounded. An older lady, not a young woman. No, she was older, had grey hair. I think the girl called her Grandma. Grandma. The word struck him like a lightning bolt. Emily had a grandmother. That opened up an entire new realm of questions. The next day, Ethan went back to the location described by the girl. The community center was a modest but tidy building, offering various services, everything from after-school tutoring to food banks. Upon entering, a young volunteer smiled politely at him. "How can I help you?" "I'm looking for a little girl," he explained, showing the photo, "and possibly her grandmother." The volunteer studied the image. I don't recognize her, but we get so many people daily. Let me call Mrs. Morris. She runs the children's program." Mrs. Morris was a stout woman with grey hair and a naturally warm demeanor. She took the photo and studied it carefully before speaking. "I can't say for sure. Maybe I saw a girl like that in last week's reading group, but I'm not certain. She was with a woman, but I didn't pay attention to whether she was old or young. I'm sorry." Ethan thanked her anyway and left his business card, asking that they contact him if Emily showed up again. That evening, in his usually silent apartment, Ethan reviewed his notes. 1 month of searching, countless locations visited, hundreds of people questioned. The leads were contradictory. Some saw a young woman, others an older one, different spots, different contexts. He glanced at the sofa where Emily had slept that one night. He had the note stored in his bedside drawer, worn from being read so often he'd memorized every curve of each letter. Outside, the city lights glittered. Somewhere, among millions of people, was a little girl who'd called him Dad. A girl who had come into his life like a comet and vanished just as quickly, leaving only questions behind. The search was changing him in ways he did not fully comprehend. The lawyer who once saw the world in terms of wins and losses, arguments and counter-arguments, now faced a more complex reality. A reality where kids shared a sandwich in a dark alley, where older folks lived under bridges, where people did what they could with the little they had. A reality in which perhaps he had a daughter. He poured himself a whiskey and took a deep breath. Tomorrow he would resume his search, and the next day and the next, he would not stop. Because for the first time in a very long while, maybe for the first time ever, Ethan Walker felt something bigger than himself. The cold, methodical man who had built his career and fortune on logical, unfeeling calculations now found himself driven by something entirely irrational, the desire to find a lost connection, to understand a bond he hadn't even known existed until a few weeks ago. And as frustrating as the lack of concrete progress was, there was something freeing in feeling so vulnerable, so uncertain, so human. He glanced at the phone, tempted to call the private investigator again and demand faster results. But something stopped him, an intuition that this was not a search he could simply outsource or speed up with money. It was a journey he had to make himself, a path that was changing not just his schedule, but also who he was at his core. Ethan Walker, the man who had spent decades building walls around himself, was now dismantling them brick by brick, searching for a little girl who had called him Dad. The late afternoon sun cast golden rays over the city as Ethan decided to check out one last park before heading back to the office. Nearly 2 months had passed since he began his relentless search. 2 months of raised hopes and dashed leads, sleepless nights. His impeccable suit was now slightly rumpled. His once perfectly trimmed beard showed signs of neglect. Even his walk had changed, less rigid, less mechanical. His co-workers at the firm noticed but kept their distance. The legendary Ethan Walker seemed to be going through some personal crisis, and no one wanted to be the first to mention the obvious. The small park was a few blocks from the Hope Center, a place Ethan had visited multiple times during his search. It was modest, with a few worn wooden benches, a small playground, and enough old trees to provide decent shade. A handful of children played on the slide, watched over by their nannies. Some elderly folks played chess at a concrete table. Everything seemed peaceful, ordinary. Then his eyes registered a solitary figure sitting on one of the swings, dark hair falling over thin shoulders, simple clothes, though clean, a faded purple backpack at her side. Ethan's heart nearly stopped. He froze, terrified she would disappear if he blinked or breathed too loudly. But the girl remained, gently swaying, her feet barely scraping the ground. Emily. Ethan walked toward her slowly, afraid she would vanish again as she had that morning in his apartment. She seemed lost in thought, idly tracing circles on the ground with the tip of her shoe. She didn't notice him until he was just a few steps away. When she finally looked up, he saw something unexpected in her eyes. Recognition, not surprise, not fear, just the calm acknowledgement of someone familiar. And then, a small, genuine smile. "Hi," Ethan said, his voice lower than he intended. "Hi," Emily replied, letting the swing slow to a stop. A silence settled between them, heavy with unasked questions. Ethan didn't know where to start. How do you begin a conversation with a child who appeared and vanished from your life like a dream? A child who might be your daughter. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, indicating the empty swing next to hers. Emily nodded, observing with curiosity as he tried to squeeze himself into a seat clearly designed for children. The sight of a suited man on a park swing might have been funny under different circumstances. "I've been looking for you," he finally said. "I know," Emily replied calmly. Her response surprised him. "How do you know?" Emily shrugged in that universal childlike way. "You asked about me in different places. People talk." Ethan nodded slowly. Of course. The community of vulnerable and homeless people networked with each other, shared information, protected their own. It was naive to think his queries wouldn't get around. "Taos disappeared," he said, trying to keep his tone neutral, free of accusation. "I had to go back to Mom," she explained, glancing down at a loose shoelace. "She'd be worried." Mom. The word hung in the air like a tangible presence. "Emily," Ethan began, carefully picking his words, "you left a note at my place." She nodded without speaking. "In the note, you called me Dad." Her large eyes met his. There was no doubt in them, just a quiet confidence that belied her age. "You are my dad," she stated, as if pointing out the color of the sky or that water was wet. Ethan swallowed, feeling simultaneously dizzy and more alert than ever. "How do you know that, Emily?" "Mom has a picture of you. Old one. She keeps it in a special box, but I've seen it lots of times." Emily kicked her legs gently, making the swing move a fraction. "And she told me." "She told you about me?" Emily nodded again. "She said you're really smart and speak well, that you're a lawyer and make a lot of money." Ethan wasn't expecting that. He felt oddly vulnerable, realizing how someone from his past had described him to this child. His child. "Did she say anything else?" he asked hesitantly. Emily's face grew slightly guarded. "She said you're cold, that all you care about is work and money, that I didn't deserve to meet you because you—" She paused, brow furrowed as she tried to recall the exact phrase, "wouldn't know how to love someone so small." The words hit him like a blow, not because they were unfair, but because, until a few weeks ago, they had probably been true. The old Ethan Walker would have behaved exactly as her mother predicted, distant and perhaps even irritated by the inconvenience of a child in his meticulously ordered life. but something had changed. "What do you think?" he asked, surprising himself with the question. "Do you think I'm like that?" Emily considered him with a seriousness remarkable for someone her age. "I'm not sure yet," she answered honestly. "You helped me when I was cold. That was nice, but Mom is smart, so maybe she's right too." The straightforwardness of her reply disarmed him. No judgment, just a willingness to decide for herself. "What's your mom's name, Emily?" "Sarah," she answered. "Sarah Miller." Miller. The surname didn't ring a bell. Could it have changed? He couldn't remember. "Is she okay?" Emily bit her lower lip, suddenly seeming much younger and more vulnerable. "Not really. She gets sad sometimes, and it's hard to find work." Those words, uttered so simply, struck Ethan with force. The worn backpack, their simple but clean clothes, their need for community resources. "Emily, where are you living now?" She hesitated for the first time, looking around as if making sure no one could overhear. "I can't say. Mom said it's a secret." Ethan felt a pang in his chest at the idea that yes, he was now thinking of her as his, child might be living in unsafe conditions. "I understand," he said gently, "but I really want to talk to your mom. It seems like we have a lot to discuss." Emily studied him again, apparently deciding whether he could be trusted. Finally, she hopped off the swing and grabbed her backpack. "I'll show you, but you have to promise not to tell anyone where we are." "I promise." She extended her tiny hand, pinky finger raised. "Pinky promise." Ethan felt something dissolve inside him. He hooked his pinky with hers, sealing the most important pact of his life. "Pinky promise." Emily led him along increasingly deserted streets, moving away from the commercial hub toward an older part of town. Former industrial buildings loomed, some abandoned, some partially repurposed. Ethan kept his pace slow for Emily's short legs, all the while feeling the surreal weight of the moment. "It's this way," she said, turning down a narrow alleyway between two buildings. At the far end of the alley was a small courtyard, hidden from street view. It had likely once been a loading bay for a factory. Now it was a makeshift camp of tents and neatly arranged belongings in plastic tubs. At the center, a small fire burned in a metal drum used for warmth or cooking. That was when Ethan saw her. She was facing away, hanging clothes on a makeshift clothesline. Dark hair tied into a messy bun, a thin figure, yet standing tall with a dignity that defied her surroundings. "Mom!" Emily called, running toward her. "Look who I brought." The woman turned and the world seemed to stop. Sarah. Not Sarah Miller. Sarah Bennett. The name flashed into Ethan's mind like lightning, along with a deluge of memories he'd buried for years. Sarah Bennett, the art student he'd dated for nearly a year in college. Sarah, with her ideals, her dreams, her passion for beauty he had never fully understood. Sarah, now rooted to the spot, her face pale like she'd seen a ghost. For a long moment, no one spoke. Emily glanced between them, confused by the sudden tension. "You found him," Sarah finally managed to say to her daughter, her voice calm but trembling underneath. "He was looking for me," Emily answered. "People at the shelters told me." Sarah nodded slowly, then addressed her daughter without taking her eyes off Ethan. "Emily, sweetie, can you fetch water for us at the station? Use the big container." Emily looked like she wanted to protest, but something in her mother's tone quelled it. She grabbed a large plastic jug from the corner and left, sneaking curious glances back over her shoulder. Once they were alone, silence descended again, even heavier. "So," Sarah finally said, crossing her arms defensively, "you finally met your daughter." The words confirmed what Ethan's heart already knew, yet hearing them spoken made him lean against the nearest wall for support. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" he asked, his voice husky with emotion. Sarah let out a humorless laugh. "I did." "No, you didn't. I never knew." "I sent you a letter," she cut him off, eyes shining with an old mix of pain and anger. "To your fancy new address in New York, when you started that big internship. I explained everything. I never got a response." Ethan furrowed his brow, struggling to recall. a letter. He had a faint memory of an envelope in Sarah's handwriting, arriving amid a chaotic stack of mail during his first frenzied days. He remembered tucking it away to read later, when life was less hectic. Then later never came. Then life happened. The internship led to a job. Late nights became the norm. Promotions came, one after another. And the letter was likely forgotten in a box lost during a move. I guess I never read it, he admitted, feeling the crushing weight of responsibility. It wasn't on purpose, Sarah. God, I have no excuses. Sarah studied him with eyes that had seen more than he could know, eyes hardened by experience but still deep. I believe you, she said at last. You were always like that, so focused on your path you didn't see anything outside it, not even a letter that would have changed your life. Her words stung because they were true. He had been that man, so consumed by ambition that he'd overlooked his own daughter's existence. How old is she? He asked, glancing in the direction Emily had gone. She's 7 years and 4 months, Sarah replied. Born in January, doing the math. He nodded. It lines up. There was never any doubt, Sarah said, a note of pride in her tone. She has your eyes and your stubbornness. Ethan took in the makeshift camp. Everything was clean and as organized as one could expect. Children's books were neatly stacked in a plastic bin, and colorful drawings lined the inside of the tent. Sarah, what happened? He asked, the question covering so much more than just their living conditions. She let out a weary sigh and sat on a turned-over crate. Life happened, Ethan. Not everyone's path is as straight as yours. She ran a hand over her hair, a gesture he recalled from college. I graduated, even with the pregnancy, landed some decent illustration gigs. But then the gallery I worked for folded. Rents went up, jobs got scarcer, especially with a little kid. She paused, examining her hands, artist's hands, with long fingers that once handled paintbrushes with such delicacy. At first, friends took us in, then cheap motels, and eventually, well, here we are. But it's temporary. I have an interview at a gallery next week. Things will get better. There was such dignity in her voice and such strength that Ethan felt a surge of admiration, something he hadn't felt since college, when Sarah would boldly challenge professors with her arguments on art and social change. Why didn't you ask for help? There are programs. I tried, she cut in, voice tinged with frustration. But the wait lists are endless. A lot of places require IDs, paperwork, proof of address that I just don't have anymore. It's easy to fall through the cracks when you don't have a permanent address. Ethan nodded, reminded of all the people he had encountered in recent weeks. Good people trying to help, but overwhelmed by infinite needs and limited resources. Why never contact me again? When you realized I hadn't responded, I wasn't hard to find. A shadow crossed Sarah's face. At first it was pride. I thought, if he can't be bothered to reply about his own daughter, I won't beg. Then, she hesitated. Then it was fear. Fear. Fear that you'd reject Emily. Fear that you'd meet her and not want her. Or worse, that you'd take her out of obligation, without actually loving her. She locked eyes with him, unwavering. You were so cold, Ethan. So detached. When we broke up, it felt like you were relieved to be rid of a distraction. The words hurt because they carried truth. That was exactly who he had been. Someone who saw relationships as obstacles, emotions as inconveniences. I figured it was better for her to be loved by one parent than rejected by two, Sarah said. That's why you told her I was too cold to love her. I told her the truth as far as I knew, Sarah sighed. But after that night, after she stumbled upon you and you helped her, she wouldn't stop talking about how nice you were, about your big fancy apartment, about how you seemed sad, but different from what I'd described. A faint, melancholy smile curved her lips. Kids are observant, and she wanted so badly for her father to be someone good, for her father to love her. Ethan felt a lump in his throat. So she snuck out to see if it was true. Sarah nodded. She found the old photo, and I told her more about you. Your determination, your intelligence. I guess I piqued her curiosity. Emily's always been stubborn. She realized we were close to your neighborhood. So she waited until I fell asleep and went off looking for you. Ethan remembered that bitterly cold night, how fateful it had seemed, and now realized it was the determination of a 7-year-old who just wanted to meet her father. Why did she come find me again today? Sarah looked away. I didn't let her. She was supposed to be at an art workshop in the community center, but Emily does what she sets her mind to. I guess she inherited more from you than just your eyes. At that moment, Emily returned, lugging the jug of water. Her face lit up to see them still standing there, talking. "Got the water," she announced proudly, setting the container down. "Thank you, sweetie," Sarah replied with a tired smile. "Why don't you grab some cups?" While Emily busied herself, Ethan moved closer to Sarah and spoke quietly. "I know I have no right to ask for anything. I know I failed you both in ways I can never fully fix, but, Sarah, I want to be part of her life. I want to take responsibility." Sarah gazed at him with those eyes that always seemed to see more than he revealed. "Responsibility," she repeated. "Is that how you see Emily? Another responsibility?" Ethan shook his head, realizing how poorly he'd phrased it. "No, not like that. I want to get to know her. I want to try being a father, even if it's late." "I want to learn." Sarah held his gaze, as though searching for any hint of dishonesty. "People don't change overnight, Ethan." "Not overnight," he agreed. "But in the last 2 months, while looking for her, something changed in me, Sarah. I started seeing the world differently, seeing people I used to overlook." He paused, choosing his words. "I'm not saying I'm suddenly a different person. I'm still the Ethan you knew, but I'm learning. And I want to keep learning." Emily returned with 3 cups, her gaze shifting between the 2 adults, sensing the tension, but also the possibility. Sarah poured water, and the 3 formed a small circle in that hidden courtyard. A high-powered attorney in an expensive suit, a talented artist in worn-out clothes, and a curious child who, somehow, had brought them together again. "Sarah, Ethan started, but she gently cut him off. "I'm not asking you to erase what happened or pretend nothing's changed. I'm not asking you to trust me right away. I'm only asking for a chance to prove I can be more than the man you remember. A chance to be a father to Emily." He was so earnest that even Sarah seemed taken aback by the shift in his demeanor. She looked at Emily, who was watching them intently. "Emily, what do you think? Do you want to get to know your dad better?" Emily didn't hesitate. "Yes." Sarah's smile held the sweet sadness that had become her signature expression. "Then I guess we can try," she said to Ethan. "A small step, one day at a time." Ethan felt an overwhelming rush of gratitude that almost floored him. That small step, that narrow window Sarah was offering, was worth more to him than all the cases he had won, all the millions he'd earned. "Thank you," he said simply. As the sun began to set over the makeshift camp, casting long shadows across the courtyard, the 3 remained there in silence. It wasn't a comfortable silence. There were still countless unresolved issues, many wounds yet unhealed, but it was a beginning Ethan had never imagined wanting so desperately. After a full week of carefully scheduled meetings with Emily and uneasy conversations with Sarah, Ethan reached a simple conclusion. Words and promises were not enough. Not even the small gifts he'd bring from time to time, children's books for Emily, art supplies for Sarah. They needed something more concrete, something that would truly change their lives. So, for 3 days, Ethan vanished. He ignored calls, cancelled appointments, leaving Sarah worried and Emily confused. He didn't mean to scare them, but he had to act swiftly. On the 4th day, he reappeared at their makeshift camp with an envelope in hand and a determined glint in his eye. "I need to show you both something," he said simply. "Will you come with me?" Sarah eyed him warily. "Where?" "Trust me," he pleaded. He knew he didn't deserve her trust, but after glancing at Emily, who was practically buzzing with curiosity, Sarah nodded reluctantly. The taxi took them to a quiet residential neighborhood far from downtown, not a wealthy suburb, but one with tree-lined streets, clean sidewalks, and an air of tranquility that starkly contrasted with the place where Sarah and Emily had been living. The car stopped in front of a small two-story house. It had a simple but well-kept facade, large windows and a small porch. The front yard, while modest, boasted newly planted flowers. A normal house, discreet and cozy. "What is this?" Sarah asked as they got out of the taxi. Ethan took a deep breath. "A house." "I can see that, Ethan. Why are we here?" Wordlessly, he opened the envelope and handed Sarah a key. "It's for you." Sarah froze, staring at the key as if it were dangerous. "What?" "I bought this place for you," Ethan explained. "It's furnished, stocked with groceries, ready to live in. There's a bedroom for Emily with room for toys, and a small office for you with art materials. I thought you could use it as a studio if you like." Sarah's expression was unreadable. A blend of shock, confusion, possibly hope or anger. "We can't accept this," she finally murmured, voice trembling. "Why not? It's too much. I don't want your charity, Ethan." "It's not charity," he countered firmly. "It's the very least I can do for you, for my daughter. It's an obligation I failed to uphold for years." Emily, who had been silently taking in the scene, approached the front door. "Can we at least see inside?" she asked, eyeing her mother hopefully. Sarah hesitated. Ethan could see the turmoil in her eyes, her pride pitted against a practical need, the desire to shield Emily from disappointment. "Just look," he suggested. "If you don't like it, we'll get back in the taxi. No pressure." Eventually, Sarah relented. Ethan gave the key to Emily, who ran to the door excited about the grown-up responsibility. After a few clumsy attempts, she managed to unlock it. Inside was just as Ethan had envisioned, simple but inviting. Comfortable furniture, neutral tones with small bursts of color, enough space to be cozy without being ostentatious. He'd even added personal touches at the last minute. A bookshelf with children's books, a vase of sunflowers, Sarah's college favorite, if memory served, a box of board games on the coffee table. Emily sprinted from room to room, exclaiming each new discovery. Sarah moved more slowly, lightly touching furniture as though afraid it might vanish. When they reached Emily's future bedroom, the girl squealed in delight. The bed had a bright comforter, a small shelf of books, and a desk near the window for drawing. The walls sported empty shelves ready to be filled with a child's knickknacks. "Mom, look! I have my own room!" Sarah's expression softened at her daughter's excitement. She locked eyes with Ethan, still wary, but now with tears threatening to spill. "And over there," Ethan pointed to a door at the end of the hallway. "That's your space." The office had a large desk near the window, a small easel, and shelves stocked with art materials, watercolors, brushes, pencils, sketch pads, everything a struggling artist might need for a fresh start. Sarah pressed a hand over her mouth, clearly overcome with emotion. "How did you know?" "I still remember your dreams," he answered simply. The silence was broken only by Emily sprinting back to show off some new treasure. Later, they gathered in the kitchen, and Sarah finally voiced the question that had been gnawing at her. "What do you want in return, Ethan?" "What's the catch?" He shook his head. "There's no catch. The house is yours. The paperwork is in Emily's name, with you as her guardian until she's 18. I can't undo what I did or didn't do for the past 7 years. But I can try to do what's right now." She studied his face, searching for deceit. "And the future. What do you want from us?" "I just want the chance to know my daughter, to be part of her life, to be a father, even if I'm starting late." Sarah looked over at Emily, who was rummaging in the fridge, fascinated by the idea of food available any time. "It's not too late," she finally whispered, her voice husky. "She's only 7. You still have time." Then, slowly, she picked up the house key from the table. In the weeks that followed, life began to settle into a routine. Ethan visited almost every day, often in the evening. He brought small treats for Emily, not lavish gifts, but little things he knew she'd enjoy. A set of shiny rocks, a dinosaur book, a kite to fly in the nearby park. Thus he discovered unexpected joys, sitting on the floor to play dominoes and being thoroughly beaten by a 7-year-old who employed surprisingly efficient tactics, listening to imaginative tales of flying cats or talking dogs, feeling a child's arms around his neck when he arrived, or a playful kiss on the cheek when he left. One night, while Emily was in the bath, Sarah showed Ethan a portfolio of the girl's drawings. Many featured 3 figures: a woman, a child, and a man in a suit. "She's been drawing this since we got back from your apartment that night," Sarah explained. "Even though I told her it was unlikely you'd want to know us." Ethan's throat tightened. "She always believed in me more than I deserved." On the 1-month anniversary of their new home, Ethan showed up with a small cake. It had become a tradition to mark each passing week. They were seated at the kitchen table, laughing at one of Emily's energetic stories, when she suddenly turned to him and said, "Thanks for the cake, Dad." Dad. That word, once terrifying, now filled Ethan with a sense of awe. It resonated deeper than any court victory or contract he'd ever signed. He noticed Sarah freeze for a second, watching carefully. But there was no correction, no discomfort, just acceptance that something crucial had changed forever. "You're welcome, Emily," he replied, fighting to keep his voice steady. Later that night, after Emily was asleep, Sarah found Ethan out on the porch, gazing at the stars. "She decided that on her own," said Sarah, taking a seat beside him. "I didn't push or forbid it." "I know," Ethan replied softly. "Emily has a mind of her own. Just like her dad." They shared a smile, perhaps the first genuinely comfortable moment since they had reconnected. Driving back to his still empty penthouse that evening, Ethan recognized that something fundamental had changed inside him. The man who once lived by deadlines, courtroom victories, and bank balances now counted the minutes until he could hear a child's fantastic stories about talking animals. The lawyer who intimidated judges and juries now trembled with emotion at the sound of a single word: Dad. For the first time in his life, Ethan Walker had found something more valuable than success. He had found his heart. The opportunity came almost by chance. Ethan was waiting for Emily to finish a drawing, part of a new Monday routine, when he noticed a newspaper ad. Meridian Gallery was seeking new talents for a group exhibition, interviews happening the following week. He clipped the ad and handed it to Sarah when she came in from the kitchen. "You should give this a shot," he said, trying to sound casual. Sarah examined the clipping apprehensively. "Meridian is a respected gallery," she murmured, almost to herself. "But it's been so long since—" "Since what?" Ethan prompted. "Since I saw myself as a real artist," she confessed, folding the paper and setting it on the table. "I've been looking for more practical jobs." Ethan understood her hesitation. The past few weeks had offered them security and comfort, but Sarah still braced for everything to collapse. She remained on the defensive, afraid to dream too big. "Just think it over," he offered, choosing not to push. Still, the seed had been planted. Over the next few days, Ethan noticed her occasionally glancing at the ad. Once, passing by her office, he saw her organizing a portfolio of older works. Some scribbled on Emily's notebook pages, others sketched on random scraps of paper, artwork she'd created under the toughest conditions. With a day left until the interview, Ethan suggested an outing. Emily was at a school activity, another part of the normality they were reclaiming, so they had a few rare hours alone. They strolled to a small park near the house, a serene spot dotted with wooden benches beneath the shade of old trees. The weather was mild, perfect for a quiet conversation. "You going to the interview tomorrow?" he asked after a few minutes of companionable silence. Sarah twirled a fallen leaf between her fingers. "I'm still not sure." "Why not?" She shrugged, so reminiscent of Emily that Ethan had to smile. "What if I'm not good enough? It's been years, Ethan. The last time I exhibited anything was before Emily was born. But you never stopped creating. Doodling while your kid sleeps is not the same as being a professional artist." Ethan turned on the bench to face her fully. "Can I be honest?" Sarah lifted an eyebrow. "Since when do you ask for permission to be honest?" He smirked at the jab. Lately, Sarah's walls occasionally lowered, and he caught glimpses of the free spirit he'd known years ago. "I've had a look at your recent sketches, what you do for Emily, the doodles in your notebook. You have more talent now than you did back in college." She rolled her eyes, but a faint blush colored her cheeks. "You don't know anything about art." "True. But I know potential, and I know people who deserve a chance. You have both, Sarah gazed into the distance, at the sun's lazy descent. "You know what's funny," she said after a moment. "During all those hard years, art was what kept me sane. When we barely had enough to eat, when we slept in shelters or on the street, I drew for Emily, for myself. Like breathing." Ethan nodded silently, encouraging her to continue. "But now that we finally have some stability, now that I can possibly go back to doing it professionally, I'm terrified." "Of what?" She sighed deeply. "Finding out I'm not good enough. That all those dreams I had were just naive." "Sarah," Ethan said softly, "you spent 7 years creating art in the worst conditions, without proper materials, without time, without support, and still, you never quit. That's not naivety, that's who you are." He paused before adding, "Remember how we met in that philosophy of art class?" She smiled, recalling the memory. "So you were so out of place, the only law major in a room full of scruffy art students. And do you remember what you told me when I stared around in panic during discussions on Kant and aesthetics? I said you didn't have to understand everything to appreciate it." "Exactly. And I'm telling you the same now. I don't know if Meridian Gallery will love your work. I don't know if you'll land that opportunity, but I do know you deserve a shot." Sarah remained silent a while. "It's not just about the art," Ethan continued. "It's about everything you represent. A woman who raised an amazing child alone under conditions that would break most people. Who kept her dignity, her kindness. Who refused to let the world snuff out her spirit." He inhaled and feeling unexpectedly vulnerable, voicing these thoughts he'd barely admitted to himself. "You are an artist, Sarah, not just on paper or canvas, but in the way you've taught Emily to see beauty in the streets, in the way you've made a home wherever you ended up." Her eyes shone with unshed tears. For the first time since reuniting, Ethan glimpsed a confident smile reminiscent of her college days. "I never imagined Ethan Walker, the contract law king, would give a speech about art and beauty." He laughed, relieved at the sudden lightening of mood. "I'm full of surprises." "Apparently," Sarah exhaled, setting her shoulders in a silent decision. "Fine. I'll go to the interview. That's all I ask. But don't expect miracles. Galleries usually have their favorites before interviews even start." "Then surprise them," Ethan replied, "like you always do." The following morning, Ethan was in an important meeting when his phone buzzed. It was Elena Torres, Meridian Gallery's director. He'd called her a few days prior to put in a good word for Sarah. "Mr. Walker," Elena sounded irritated, "I'm calling because your recommended candidate, Sarah Bennett, did not show up for her scheduled interview this morning." Ethan's heart dropped. "She didn't show?" "No. I adjusted my schedule to see her personally, per your request." "I'm disappointed. There must be some mistake," Ethan insisted. "She confirmed she would be there." "Well, it's almost 11 Tuan and the interview was at 9 Quam. Sorry, but we have other candidates." After hanging up, Ethan tried calling Sarah, straight to voicemail. Again, nothing. A deep sense of urgency filled him. It was unlike Sarah to skip something this important, especially after their conversation. Something had gone wrong. He cancelled all further meetings and drove straight to Sarah's house. Racing through traffic, he conjured up every worst-case scenario. Had they run away? Had Sarah lost her nerve? Arriving, he noticed the curtains closed even though the day was bright. He knocked several times with no reply. He was about to use the spare key he kept when he finally heard slow footsteps inside. Sarah opened the door, looking utterly exhausted. Her eyes were red, her hair disheveled. "What happened?" Ethan demanded at once. "Emily," she croaked. "She's sick." Sarah stepped aside. The normally tidy home was a wreck. Blankets strewn across the couch, half-empty glasses of water, medicine bottles on the coffee table. In the bedroom, Emily lay curled up on the bed, her face flushed with fever, eyes glassy. She tried to smile when she saw Ethan but ended up wincing. "Started last night," Sarah explained from the doorway. "I thought it was just a cold, Hags, but her fever spiked at dawn. We used what meds we had and cold compresses. She got a little better by morning, but then got worse." "Why didn't you call me?" Ethan asked, feeling her burning forehead. Sarah folded her arms defensively. You had that big meeting. I thought I could handle it. And the interview? She merely shrugged in resignation. Some things are more important. No bitterness, no recrimination, just the truth. Emily was her top priority, always had been. Jobs could wait. That was the kind of sacrifice Sarah had made countless times over the years. She needs a doctor, Ethan declared. Now. I know, Sarah sighed, distraught. I was looking up the free clinic. The wait is 5 hours. No, Ethan cut her off. We're going to Dr. Bennett's clinic downtown. It's private. Ethan, we can't. Now is not the time, he interrupted. Emily needs immediate care. We'll argue about money later. Sarah didn't protest further. Emily's fever spoke for itself. Within 20 minutes, they were at one of the city's top clinics, Dr. Bennett's facility. The doctor, a warm middle-aged man, examined Emily thoroughly. A virus, he finally confirmed, common this time of year. But the high fever is worrying. Let's run some tests to be sure. The following hours were a blur of tests, IV fluids, and constant monitoring. Sarah never left her daughter's side, while Ethan handled paperwork, phone calls, whatever he could do to help. Late in the afternoon, the fever finally broke. Test results showed nothing beyond the viral infection. Relief washed over everyone. She'll be fine, the doctor reassured them. Just needs a few days rest, plenty of fluids, and regular meds. Leaving the clinic, Emily dozed in Ethan's arms, still groggy. By the time they arrived home, evening had fallen. Sarah looked physically depleted, yet visibly relieved. Thank you, she murmured, after Ethan tucked Emily into bed. I don't know what I would have done if... Her voice trailed off. Ethan knew she was thinking about the bleak possibilities if they were still on the streets. No stable home, no quick access to care, no resources for medicine. Don't think about that, he said quietly. You're safe now. He spent the night in the guest room, neither one mentioning the lost interview or the gallery. There were more urgent matters at hand. A week later, with Emily fully recovered and back at school, Sarah took Ethan by surprise with an announcement. I rescheduled the interview at Meridian Gallery. It's this afternoon. Ethan lowered the newspaper he'd been reading. Really? How'd you manage that? Sarah gave a hesitant smile. I called the director, explained what happened, and emailed some photos of my recent work. She agreed to see me. That's fantastic. He felt a surge of pride. This was the first time Sarah had taken such initiative since they reconnected. Want me to drive you? I need to do it alone, she said, a new determination in her tone. But thank you. Hours later, Ethan received a text from Sarah asking him to meet her at the gallery. The urgency in her words worried him, but he tried not to jump to conclusions. Meridian was nearly empty when he arrived. It was a sleek, unpretentious space with lights carefully angled to showcase the art. He walked through the room searching for Sarah, finally spotting her in the back, transfixed by a painting on the wall. Approaching quietly, he realized why she was so mesmerized. An aquarelle, medium-sized, simply framed. It depicted a couple on a park bench, partly shaded by swaying leaves. Their faces weren't detailed, yet the intimacy of the scene was unmistakable. At the bottom corner, the signature read, S. Bennett, 2004. It's yours, Ethan noted, instantly recognizing her style. Sarah nodded, voice hushed. One of the last ones I did before we ended. Part of a series on public spaces and private moments. I never thought I'd see it again. A gallery staffer approached, noticing their interest. Beautiful piece, isn't it? She said politely. It's part of our permanent collection, donated years ago by an anonymous collector who never wanted to be identified. Anonymous collector, Sarah repeated, giving Ethan a quick sideways glance. Yes, the woman smiled. It's more common than you think. Some people love art but prefer privacy. She walked off to help other visitors, leaving them alone once more. Was that you? Sarah asked as soon as the woman was out of earshot. Ethan frowned, genuinely confused. No, how could it be? We lost contact completely. Something in Sarah's expression said she believed him. Strange, she murmured. Fate has a peculiar sense of humor. Before they could continue the conversation, a woman with short grey hair and bright-framed glasses approached. "Sarah Bennett," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Elena Torres, the gallery director. I see you found your own work in our collection." Sarah shook her hand, still appearing dazed. "Yes, it's unexpected. A remarkable coincidence," Eleanor agreed. "Or maybe a sign. When I saw your digital portfolio, something felt familiar. But I didn't connect the dots until we spoke. Only then did I recall we had a piece of yours in our permanent collection." Ethan hung back, letting them speak. "Sarah," Elena continued, "after viewing your current work and hearing about your plans for community-based workshops, I've decided to do more than just offer you a spot in our group exhibition. I'd like you to come on as the gallery's resident artist, with the possibility of curating our community outreach exhibits in the future." Sarah's eyes went wide. "Are you serious?" "Absolutely. Your background and artistic sensitivity are exactly what we need, and frankly, your personal story of resilience is inspiring. Art doesn't exist apart from the life of its creator." They continued discussing details, while Ethan drifted off, giving them space. He walked around the exhibit, half listening, half lost in thought. 30 minutes later, Sarah found him near the entrance, a contract in her bag and a gleam in her eyes he hadn't seen since college. "Ready to go?" he asked softly. She nodded, but before leaving, she cast one last look at the gallery, at her painting on the far wall, and at the new door opening in her life. "Ready," she said, and for the first time since they reunited, Ethan believed her completely. Ethan's law firm occupied 3 entire floors of one of the city's most impressive financial towers. All the associate attorneys had their own private offices, but Ethan's corner suite on the top floor boasted floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a sweeping view of the skyline. It intimidated clients and commanded respect, exactly as planned. On this particular afternoon, though, his imposing office featured an unusual scene. Emily sat in his huge leather executive chair, spinning around and giggling, while Sarah watched from a visitor's sofa, trying and failing to keep a straight face. "One more spin and you'll be sick," Sarah warned. "No, I won't," Emily insisted, giving herself another push. "Dad's chair is magic." The word "dad" still caused an odd tightening in Ethan's chest, even after months. A blend of pride, fear, and an unfamiliar happiness he would never have predicted. "All set," announced Mr. Martin, a family law attorney, walking in with a folder. "We just need the signatures." Emily halted her spinning, suddenly curious about the serious energy in the room. She watched intently as the adults gathered around the desk. The document was straightforward, but carried enormous weight. A formal recognition of paternity. Emily would now be legally acknowledged as a Walker, with all the rights and protections that implied. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah murmured when Mr. Martin stepped out momentarily to grab a functioning pen. "It'll change everything, officially." "I've never been more certain of anything," Ethan replied. His gaze fell on Emily, who was currently doodling on an expensive pad of legal stationery he'd given her to keep her occupied. She stuck her tongue out a bit in concentration. He knew that gesture so well now. He knew her little habits, tastes, and quirks. He was no longer a stranger in his own daughter's life. When Mr. Martin returned, Ethan signed the forms with a calm assurance normally reserved for his largest deals. Sarah signed next, her hand trembling slightly. "Now you sign here, Emily," the attorney said, pointing to a line. "It just shows you understand what's happening." Emily held the pen solemnly, pressing it too hard, leaving a crooked, childlike signature that might have been the most precious thing Ethan had ever witnessed. "All done," Mr. Martin declared with a smile. "Emily Bennett Walker is now legally your daughter, Mr. Walker. Congratulations." A hush descended. Emily broke it first. "So does this mean I can draw on the walls at your apartment now, Dad?" The office erupted in laughter, instantly dispersing the tension. "No, definitely not," Ethan pretended to chide. "But it does mean you're officially a Walker. And Walkers keep their promises. So I guess we have a celebration to get to, right?" Emily's eyes shone. "The picnic in the park." "Exactly. It was a promise made weeks ago, a small celebration in the park once the legal process was finalized. Nothing extravagant, just a picnic with ice cream and games. The kind of event the old Ethan Walker would have found frivolous, but now seemed perfectly fitting. As they gathered up their things, Ethan noticed Sarah looking at him with an unreadable expression. "What?" he asked gently, once Emily dashed ahead to call the elevator. "Just thinking about how much everything has changed," Sarah replied. "A year ago, you never would have believed you'd be planning a picnic to celebrate paternity." There was no accusation in her tone, just a calm observation. "The best changes are the ones we never plan," he said, surprising himself with the sudden insight. Sarah smiled, a true smile that reached her eyes. Who'd have thought Ethan Walker would become such a philosopher? The months that followed brought a rhythm Ethan never imagined possible, but now he couldn't picture his life otherwise. He kept a guest room in Sarah's house. For nights he stayed late after dinner, or ended up crashing after reading Emily a bedtime story. His luxurious penthouse was still technically his residence, but he seldom used it. At the office, he delegated multiple cases, cut down his hours, and to everyone's shock, began refusing clients whose values clashed with his new worldview. People noticed. "You've changed," remarked Mark Evans, one of the firm's senior partners, during a meeting. He didn't sound critical, just observant. "I'm more selective," Ethan said simply. "It's not just that. You're more human." Months prior, Ethan might have bristled. Now he just smiled. "Thank you. That's exactly what I'm trying to be." One morning, he received a call from Emily's school. She'd fallen during recess and sprained her ankle. "Nothing serious," the principal assured him, "but someone needed to come get her." Without hesitation, Ethan cancelled a crucial client meeting and drove to the school. Only after the fact did he realize he hadn't paused to weigh professional costs or consider consequences. Emily took precedence, plain and simple. It was a clarity he'd never experienced before. He found Emily in the nurse's station, her face blotchy from tears but bravely smiling. "Look, Dad, they wrapped my ankle with a special bandage," she said, showing him with pride. "Looks great," he agreed, helping her hop off the cot. "Let's go home. We can watch that dinosaur movie you've been wanting to see." Emily leaned on him for support as they hobbled to the car. Halfway there, she stopped, looking up at him with eyes so similar to his own. Big, brown, full of a serious maturity. "Thanks for picking me up, Dad." "I'll always come," Ethan replied, and he knew it was the truest statement he'd ever made. The transformation at work extended to home. Ethan kept discovering new facets of fatherhood. He learned to braid Emily's hair for school, after several clumsy tries, check her homework, cope with nightmares, treat scraped knees. He also realized Emily had a knack for art, clearly inherited from Sarah. Together, they set up a small painting area in the backyard, spending hours creating side by side, his stiff, technical sketches contrasting with Emily's colorful, free-flowing pieces. One day, he noticed Emily was observing him instead of painting. "What?" he asked, intrigued by her serious expression. "I'm trying to see if you're like the dad I imagined," she replied with candid, childlike honesty. He stared, momentarily speechless. "What do you think?" Emily cocked her head. "You're better," she decided. "The dad I imagined couldn't play dominoes or draw." Ethan chuckled, though his chest tightened. "I'm glad I beat your expectations. And you stay," she added, returning to her sketch. "The dad I imagined always left in the end." In that moment, Ethan silently vowed he would never again be the man who walked away. Ever. Meanwhile, his relationship with Sarah continued evolving at its own pace. There was no rush, no label, just mutual respect and a growing closeness. Sometimes, when Emily slept, they talked for hours on the porch, reconnecting with who they had been and discovering who they were now. One night, Sarah mentioned a call for submissions to an international art show she was considering. "It'd be amazing for your career," Ethan commented. "Yes," she agreed, "but it means a 2-week trip to Paris in spring." A loaded pause followed. This would be the first extended separation since they'd formed their new family dynamic. "Emily and I would manage," Ethan finally said. "It'd be hard, but we'd manage." "You deserve it, Sarah." She studied his face in the dim porch light, as if confirming he meant it. "You really have changed," she said softly. Ethan pondered her statement earnestly. I think it's less that I've changed and more that I've rediscovered parts of myself that were dormant, he replied. The man who always chose work first is still in here somewhere. But there's room for more now. Sarah reached across the small table, entwining her fingers with his. That simple, intimate gesture said more than words could. Spring arrived, bringing Sarah's first solo show at Meridian. Titled Invisible, it was a poignant collection of scenes and portraits capturing the reality of people society often overlooks. Those who are homeless, those who work the night shift, single parents. It was raw, honest, and profoundly moving. On opening night, the gallery brimmed with critics, collectors, and art enthusiasts. Sarah, dressed in a simple black dress Ethan had seen hanging in her closet for weeks, looked both radiant and nervous. Emily, in her best outfit, mingled confidently with the crowd. Occasionally, she'd grab an adult's sleeve and launch into an explanation of one of her mum's pieces. People found it utterly charming. She's a great assistant curator, joked Elena Torres, the gallery director, standing beside Ethan. You must be proud of them. Prouder than I can put into words, he answered sincerely. A well-known art critic approached, champagne flute in hand. Mr. Walker, are you the artist's partner? Ethan hesitated briefly. We're a family, he replied simply. No need to detail their complicated backstory. Well, I must say her work is remarkable. The way she captures dignity amidst hardship is authentically powerful, not contrived. Sarah's lived a lot of what she paints, Ethan replied quietly. She knows it from the inside. When the show ended and the last guests trickled out, Sarah, Emily, and Ethan slumped on the gallery floor, exhausted but overjoyed. That was the best day of my life, Emily declared, though her eyes were heavy with sleep. Sarah laughed softly, stroking her daughter's hair. Better than the amusement park? Or Christmas? Emily mulled the question. Different. Tonight I saw everyone looking at your paintings, Mum. They realized how special you are. Tears pricked Sarah's eyes. Ethan felt his throat tighten. Ready to go home? He murmured gently. We all deserve some rest. Home. The word came so easily now. A few months later, on a bright Sunday morning, they gathered in the backyard for their new tradition, breakfast outdoors, simple fare, fruit, toast, coffee for the grown-ups, hot chocolate for Emily, but it was theirs, a time when the outside world slowed down. The backyard, once just a patch of grass, had transformed in the past few months. Ethan discovered a surprising fondness for gardening, something about the tangible work, the patience it required, the satisfaction of watching things grow. Now, colorful flowers and a small herb garden thrived. I've got an idea, Emily declared between bites of her apple. Let's tell stories. It was a game they'd invented. One person began a story, then the next continued it, and so on, weaving increasingly absurd narratives about astronaut princesses, dragons afraid of heights, or robots who dreamed of becoming gardeners. Once upon a time, Sarah started, there was a city where people forgot how to laugh. Until one day, Emily picked up, a girl found a mysterious box in the park. Inside the box, Ethan added, was a puppy with a map on its collar. The story went on, sillier with each round, drawing out laughter from the three of them. At some point, Ethan watched the scene as if from a distance. The sun filtering through apple tree leaves, the dancing shadows on the table, Emily's animated face as she recounted her part of the story, the tender smile on Sarah's face. He realized he'd found something he didn't know he was missing. It wasn't perfect. They still argued sometimes, faced challenges, felt insecure. Sarah occasionally feared losing everything again. Emily still had nightmares about their time on the streets. Ethan had to constantly remind himself that life was more than work and victory. But they were imperfect together. Every day, they chose each other, not out of obligation or convenience, but out of love, a word Ethan now not only spoke, but lived. And then, Emily concluded grandly, they realized they already had everything they needed. Sarah and Ethan exchanged a glance over Emily's head. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It wasn't a perfect resolution or a guarantee of endless happiness. It was simply a moment, A choice renewed, a tangible presence. And that was more than enough, Ethan found. The cold loneliness that had once been his only companion had given way to a steady, messy, wonderful warmth, a family that was rebuilding itself day by day. He smiled at his daughter's dramatic flourish. "I like that ending," he said, returning her grin. "It's the best one of all." When the story ended, Emily ran off to play with the sprinkler Ethan had installed for hot days. Sarah moved to the chair Emily had vacated, sitting beside him. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, noticing his reflective expression. "How life can change completely in so little time," he replied. "How I thought I had everything, but really had nothing that truly mattered." Sarah's smile still made his heart race, even now, after all they'd endured. "What about now?" "Now I have everything," he said simply. "You two, this house, these Sundays, this—" He searched for the right word. "This warmth." In the distance, Emily's laughter echoed as she played in the water, a sound that symbolized everything Ethan had found. Joy, spontaneity, life in its purest form. "I like that ending," he murmured, gazing fondly at his daughter. "It's the best ever." And as the sun rose higher, Ethan knew there was no flawless happy ending in store. There would be conflicts, hurdles, and inevitable wounds from the past. But there would also be this choice to be a family, day after day, one step at a time. That was enough. It was everything. And Ethan Walker, the man who had once shivered alone in his gilded tower of solitude, now found himself surrounded by a life warmer and richer than he could ever have imagined. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like, because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.